So good evening, everyone. If I could just have your attention, we'll start our program. Good evening. So welcome, everyone. My name is Josh Blank. I'm a professor at the law school and the faculty director of the Graduate Tax Program. And on behalf of my colleague, David Rosenblum, director of the International Tax Program, and the other members of the tax faculty and administration, I'm delighted to welcome you to the celebration of the 70th anniversary of the Graduate Tax Program and the 20th anniversary of the International Tax Program. We should clap. Yes. So we are thrilled that so many of our alumni, our current and former students, our faculty are here with us tonight to celebrate these two special milestones. I'd also like to just take a moment to thank the other members of the planning committee on the faculty and in the administration who helped organize this event, and just specifically Danielle Warren, our assistant in the Graduate Tax Program, who coordinated many aspects of this program, and Eric Wittstein from our Office of Alumni Relations, who helped with this program as well. For the first decades after the enactment of the federal income tax in 1913, tax law was primarily an area of study for accountants. It appeared in law school classrooms, but only as a topic in constitutional law. When it was founded about 70 years ago, the NYU Graduate Tax Program created the first home, you might even call it haven, for law students who were interested in studying tax. Today, the tax programs at NYU Law School are as strong as ever, offering over 50 different courses each year, hosting dozens of conferences and programs, and attracting the nation's top students who are passionate and interested in learning about tax. The program currently has a total of approximately 450 students between all of the different programs: the full-time, part-time tax LLM program, the International Tax Program, Executive LLM and Tax Program, and the Masters of Study in Law and Tax programs. On a personal note, I can attest that the tax program at NYU is a truly special and unique place. Even though I spent most of my time at work as a law firm buried in the Section 368 regulations, the highlight of my day was 5:30 p.m. on a Thursday when I could hop on the F train to NYU and join a discussion led by Professors Kenny Heitner and Len Schmolka on horizontal double dummy mergers. As a member of the faculty, I've come to appreciate how much the tax programs at NYU are like a family that really enjoys tax. Just to illustrate this point, consider how many members of our faculty have learned from one another at NYU. Steve Gardner, who will be here later this evening, he's teaching right now, supervised a directed research project for Victor Zonana. Victor Zonana taught Tax 1, now called Income Tax, to Noel Cunningham. Noel Cunningham taught taxation of property transactions to John Steinis. John Steinis taught me Section 355 on a substitute lecture day, but it still counts, in corporate tax 2. I taught tax policy to Clint Wallace, who is one of our acting assistant professors, and he's now teaching students in the program, some of whom may eventually teach in the program. As I'm sure my colleagues will agree, as a teacher in the tax program, it's incredibly rewarding and exciting to see the evolution of students who show their first sign of tax enthusiasm, whether it's talking about Section 356 and BOOT, or non-recourse liabilities and partnership tax, as they flourish into accomplished tax lawyers who ultimately hold positions in the nation's top law and accounting firms, in-house corporate tax departments, governments, and legal academia. So tonight, we gather to consider the accomplishments and the contributions of the NYU tax programs over the past several decades. To begin our program, it's my pleasure to introduce our tremendous dean, Trevor Morrison, who is the Eric M. and Laurie B. Roth Professor of Law and Dean at NYU School of Law, to say a few words. Trevor.
Thanks, Josh, and good evening to all of you. I'm really thrilled to be here to help celebrate these two important milestones at the school, namely the 70th anniversary of the Graduate Tax Program and the 20th anniversary of the International Tax Program. I should say, by way of confession at the beginning, I am not a tax lawyer. I'm a constitutional lawyer, which is to say that the only tax law I know was participating in an amicus brief a few years ago arguing that the right way to think about the Affordable Care Act's individual mandate was as a tax, of course. That's about where my expertise in tax ends, but not So my appreciation for this program, which is really deep and broad, in my just about 3 years here, I've come to see both the International Tax Program and the Graduate Tax Program as true jewels in the crown at this law school, and really gained a number of insights I feel like I have about these programs. Both have had major impacts on the historical evolution of this school as a leading law school, not just within the tax field, but helping to position the school as a leading school nationally and internationally. In 1945, one of my predecessors, Dean Arthur Vanderbilt, who had the decanal immodesty to name this building after himself, seized the opportunity then to create the country's first graduate tax program. And this really was a prescient decision. I'll quote another of my predecessors, Russell Niles, who described the origins of the tax program and Dean Vanderbilt's role in creating it as follows, and I'm quoting Niles. Vanderbilt was not a tax lawyer. He did not even find the study of tax law congenial. But as an imaginative realist, he saw before any other law school dean what the impact of the new tax laws would be on the post-war world. And so with his usual audacity and vigor, he recruited a tax law faculty and with their help set up the most complete and imaginative offering ever made in this field. That was true then. Over 70 years later, it is true today. The Graduate Tax Program has maintained its position as the premier program of its kind. It is the model, of course, that many other schools seek to emulate, but none doing so well as ours here. Second, I'll note that both tax programs, both the Graduate Tax Program and the International Tax Program, really continue today to enrich the intellectual life of the law school and to serve each as vibrant centers of debate and discussion for tax practitioners, academics, and policymakers alike. The foundation of the tax program, of course, is its strong faculty, over a dozen full-time faculty members, over 3 dozen adjunct faculty members. The faculty is itself comprised of leaders in all important debates on tax law and policy and practice, both domestically and internationally. During the last few years, to think about programs put on by the Graduate Tax Program and the International Tax Program, we've hosted many dynamic conferences and events for students and alumni. Many of you, I'm sure, were in attendance at some of these, including a day-long symposium on Piketty's best-selling Capital in the 21st Century, featuring Piketty himself, a public lecture by Jason Furman, chairman of the White House Council on Economic Advisors, titled Business Tax Reform and Economic Growth, weekly roundtable discussions with leading practitioners and government officials addressing international tax topics, among others, and many social events for students of both programs, including, amazingly, an annual tax movie night. I guess it can't be more frequent than annual, really, or we might run out. But it's been tremendous, highlighting the appearance of tax law in popular culture. The tax program is also a source of important innovation, and this is perhaps not always the way that everyone thinks of the program, but it really is a source of innovation within the law school in terms of pedagogical method. And in that sense, an innovator in legal education more broadly, even beyond this school. It is really hard to read about the state of legal education or higher education today without seeing mention of the rising role of technology in how we teach, questions of the role of online education in legal education. And we are a real leader in that space thanks to the Graduate Tax Program. We are far beyond merely exploring online education. With our executive LLM in tax and our MSL in taxation, we're real leaders in online legal education in that space. And that marks us as important innovators in legal education generally. And third, and finally, I've learned that one of the main reasons that our tax programs are so strong in these areas is that we benefit tremendously from the participation of our alumni, many of you. Our alumni support the Graduate Tax Program and the International Tax Program by teaching as adjuncts, by speaking on panels and at other events here at the school, by mentoring our current students and recent graduates, and this really is tremendously important, and we're very grateful to those of you who offer your time this way. And of course, through supporting the activities of both programs in philanthropic ways, through the Wallace Lyon Eustace Fund and the International Tax Program Practice Council. In all of these ways, your support really is indispensable to the continued success of these two programs. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to say congratulations to the Graduate Tax Program and the International Tax Program on these important two milestones. Dan Shaviro and a few other of us were just noting that the 75th anniversary is a natural time to mark the progress of a program, and so too 25th. So I think that means not later than 5 years from now, we should reconvene to continue to congratulate all of us on these programs. But thank you for being here tonight. Thanks very much.
So thank you very much, Trevor, for those remarks. We're honored to have an esteemed group of speakers, including current and former faculty members and some of our most prominent alumni who will help us celebrate these two milestones. I'll just describe the speakers and what they'll discuss and then turn the mic over to them. Carr Ferguson will discuss the origins of the Graduate Tax Program. Victor Zonano will describe his experience as a student and junior professor in the program, as well as an overview of some of the distinguished practitioners who've graduated from it. John Samuels will discuss how the Graduate Tax Program prepared him for high-ranking positions in government and leadership of one of the world's largest in-house corporate tax departments. Carlyn McCaffrey will describe her experience as one of the first women tax professors at the law school. Noel Cunningham will review the role of the tax program in fostering new teachers. Deborah Skank will address the impact of the tax program on tax scholarship through the Tax Law Review and other sources. And David Rosenblum will discuss how the International Tax Program evolved from the Graduate Tax Program. And at the conclusion of the evening, we'll honor several individuals who've made significant contributions to the tax program and to the tax profession. So with that, I am pleased to welcome Carr Ferguson, and I'll also say we're very grateful that Carr made the trip cross-country to be here tonight. So welcome, Carr.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Trevor, for your good remarks. Dear colleagues, if I may still refer to the faculty that way, although I haven't taught here for the last 2 or 3 years. Dear friends, I'm glad we decided to do this at the 70th anniversary. I don't know that I would have made the 75th, but I am very happy to be here tonight, and particularly thinking about Josh's link of teaching and students, to look at the first couple of rows and see so many of my students who taught: Carlyn Sunborg McCaffrey now, John Samuels, probably one of my dearest friends ever and still, Victor, Noel, both students of mine, Harvey and Lenny Schmolker are both here. They were in my class, but I think I was students of them more than anything else. Wonderful students all, and I'm probably missing a number of you, but anyway, you know how much love I feel toward the program. I guess I'm the first speaker because I am the relic of the early days and was asked by Josh to speak about them. Now, there are a lot of distinguished personages and I suppose institutions with less distinguished pasts. I'm going to speak about our beginnings. I think that Dean Vanderbilt probably was right. He didn't know much about tax, and he did not really start this program. Jerry Wallace started this program. And one cannot speak about the early days of the program without talking about the man we older students and lawyers adore. Jerry did not have distinguished beginnings. He was, except the fact that he was a pulling guard on Red Grange's Fighting Illini football team in the 20s. He did very well in school, went to appropriate places. After working in the Elgin Watch Company and making watches and being discharged from a girls' school where he tried to teach geometry unsuccessfully. But he loved teaching, and his early days in the 30s were spent teaching at Northwestern Law School and then at Yale. He loved Northwestern. He was from that part of the world and felt at home. I think he was less comfortable at Yale. He loved some of the faculty members. J.W. Moore was a dear friend of his, Thurman Arnold. Others seemed a little stuffy for him. When the war came, he went into service, but in a civilian capacity. He was Assistant Attorney General Clark's deputy in the tax division of the Department of Justice, and after the war joined Cravath, Swaine, and Moore, where Arthur Vanderbilt found him. Jerry was a legend by then. His students, both at Northwestern and Yale, whether they became tax lawyers or not, regarded him almost to a person, I think. I was about to say almost to a man, but in those days it was almost the same thing, wasn't it? And as the best teacher that had. And that's how he came to Vanderbilt's attention. Vanderbilt did have the idea of a graduate tax program. There was a need for one. The law firms found after the Second World War that the high rates of tax, the excess profits tax added to it, had created enormous confusion among their clients, which they were not really intellectually equipped to handle. And while they could assign suffering new associates to this new field, everyone felt the need for a graduate tax program for young lawyers. Vanderbilt saw that, found Jerry, and Jerry was the man who organized it, broke it into courses, found the very distinguished tax lawyers, which became his adjunct faculty, and began to attract students. I was not one of the first students. I came 13 years later, but by then, the program was legendary, coast to coast. The graduates had begun to infiltrate the middle ranks prematurely of tax lawyers, and some were already partners and in positions of command, both in practice and in the government. And I think many of us youngsters at that time, I had been a trial lawyer in the Department of Justice tax division for 5 years, felt almost compelled to come here. I was in the class of 59 to 60 and have been associated with the school since then, a visiting professor in 61 and returned to the full-time faculty in the fall of 1962. Now, we think of coming home to this building, most of us who took the program, but this is not where the program started. The tax program Jerry started was across the square in one of the old tall loft buildings where the law school had been allocated a couple of floors. That's where Jerry began it. It was only when Vanderbilt Hall was opened in 1952, after, I would say, after Arthur Vanderbilt's short but explosive deanship. He was dean from 43 until 48, and then he was off to other things. But by then, the enormous number of innovations Vanderbilt had started, including the program, were well underway, and the enthusiasm of its graduates led to the funds that made this building possible. So it was here that we found the program and participated in it. What did he do? Jerry believed that clients were less interested in issues than they were in answers. And he felt that while it was all very well during law school years to identify issues, he wanted to build a program which had answers. And however difficult the strategies were for finding those answers, those were the ones he wanted to employ in the classroom. He had started at Northwestern and then later at Yale, perfecting from hypotheticals he gave in class, written problems, which became critical parts of his assignments, along with very specific and narrow parts of the statute, regulations, cases, rulings, and so forth. If you were prepared, and who dared not be prepared in Jerry Wallace's class, you learned the law. you learned how to deal with the questions. And when the class started and you were ready to deal with the first issue which was assigned, Jerry would immediately give you a hypothetical that was 45 to 90 degrees off what you'd read. And you learned to deal with and cope with and apply the statute and the regulations to constantly varying, shimmering states of facts that were somewhat different from what you'd learned. The result of this, at times terrifying, but deeply probing process was that over the year, if you spent at least 12 hours a day, probably for me it was 14 or 15 being a slow reader, you learned a lot of tax law. Not as much as Jerry, who knew more than anybody, but enough to go out into practice and really help people. Jerry's program succeeded far beyond anything Vanderbilt could have imagined. And it was not long before he needed some other full-time people. Adjuncts were fine, but adjuncts don't have the time to build class materials, change them every year as the law changed, and indeed it did, decide critically what needed to be amputated, and I must say the removal of some wonderfully refined programs or problems, thinking, for example, of collapsible corporations, which I remember Marty Ginsburg thought was going to be an annuity for him the rest of his life, and he was terribly disappointed when that problem had to go. And many other areas of special hobby and interest had to be thrown out to be replaced by new stuff every year, as you all know as tax lawyers. One of the things that attracts us to this crazy, bemusing part of law is its fluency, its protean nature, the new places where we find intersections with the rest of the law. And so the problem of building, tearing down, reconstructing problems, of learning constantly the new developments and trying to apply them, required a full-time faculty. Jerry's first great ally was Charlie Lyon. Charlie, like Jerry, had served in the Department of Justice. Before that, he had served as an important prosecutor, both at the Nuremberg trials and then later for the King Committee, investigating irregularities in the IRS and the Department of Justice that led to the removal of both the Chief Counsel and the Assistant Attorney General. During Truman's years, Truman, when he had to remove his Assistant AG for tax, asked who had found out about all this. It turned out to be Charlie. Truman said, okay, make Charlie Lyon my next Assistant Attorney General, and he was. But Charlie and Jerry, however different they were in many respects, were great friends and shared a love of this program, and both understood that its purpose was to prepare young lawyers to practice. Fairly soon, Jim Eustace and I were retained to our mutual joy and mutual admiration. And we were joined by several of you here who became good friends along the way, and several who are not here. Norman Redlick, I remember with fondness, and several others who had been attracted and been recruited to be part of the tax program and glanced off, including Edmund Kahn, who was recruited originally to edit the Tax Law Review, and then found what I'm sure for him was a higher calling in jurisprudence. But there were enough of us who stuck, enjoyed, were sold on the program to make it possible to deal with class sizes of well over 100. The program, and certainly this was part of Vanderbilt's original thought, the program with class sizes of 100 provided enormous financial leverage for the school. Charlie Lyon once said that we were the school's football team. And indeed we were, I'm sure, very profitable for a number of years. For a while, I wondered how Jerry Wallace knew so much, because when I saw him at school, and you saw him at school, his office was full of students. There was a glass of scotch on his table and on your side of his table as well. After classes, in the early days, you would find him frequenting the Red Witch or the Aurora down on 3rd Street, or someplace, wherever he was surrounded by students. He knew his students. And when placement time came toward the end of the year, Jerry was on the telephone for them, calling all over the country. Many of us owe our first job to Jerry Wallace, not to our scintillating personality, but to Jerry. And he was our friend. When I was able to join the faculty and become his colleague, he was my advisor, my confessor, my foster father. I think the years I was blessed to be his colleague were some of the richest and most rewarding of my life. But I found out how Jerry knew so much. He didn't sleep at night. When he got home, his old house in Old Greenwich had 4 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. All of them were lined with bookshelves full of books that had been read. His desks, and he had partner desks in every office, were piled high with yellowing advance sheets which had been marked up, and all of them had the margins cut off. I don't know why he did that. Maybe he didn't get enough scissors play as a boy, but he loved to clip the margins off of his advance sheets. And he remembered everything. I was at a teachers' conference one winter with Jerry and an old pal of his from his Northwestern days, Nat Nathanson, and they fell into an argument about a small point in Lincoln's life. They were both Lincoln scholars, among other things. And finally, it grew sufficiently heated. I was, needless to say, very quiet during this. Jerry said, well, we've got to get a telephone and settle this. He had a telephone brought to the desk, or to our lunch table. In those days, you could do that. There were telephones. We didn't have these things you hold in your hand these days. And Jerry called Opal Wallace at home in Old Greenwich and said, Opal, go into Robert's old bedroom and turn left, and on the 3rd shelf down from the top, you'll find Brown's Life of Lincoln. And open it up to page 43. And I want you to read to Nat. I've got Nat here. Nat had known Opal in their Northwestern days. Nat and his dear wife, Leah, and Opal and Jerry were frolicking youngsters on that faculty, I found out. And read Nat that first sentence. Opal found it. He gave the phone to Nat. Nat listened to it, said, okay, you won that one, Jerry. That's the kind of mind Jerry Wallace had. He truly had a retentive photographic memory, and one which wasn't simply a camera's memory, but a great intellect's memory. I worked with him one week up there redoing the tax procedure problems. I would work in the day. He would get up late afternoon, play the organ, have a drink. He had a lovely baritone voice. He sang as he played. Then he would go to work. He would mark up everything I'd done the day before, leave me notes which I'd find the next morning, detailed, critical, probing notes, which required me first to respond to what he'd done before I could go into the next problem. He was, in terms of tax knowledge, without a peer. But you wouldn't know it around the school, because his time at the school was for his colleagues, for his students, and for the program. Now, what I've described, a man and his acolytes, including me, who put teaching first, doesn't sound like a very distinguished beginning for this program. This program today, as Trevor described it, has so many institutes. Harvey, you didn't even mention your wonderful institute on charitable concerns and matters, which I think is truly part of the jewel of this crown. We had none of that, and we didn't have a career services office. We were the career service office. But while its beginnings may be considerably less distinguished than what we're doing now, I don't think you should be ashamed of its parentage. We who shared Jerry's work found it, if not a noble calling, at least one which the students appreciated and which those of us who taught them took a lot of joy in. Not only then, but we still hold it, those of us who have survived, principally because of the friendships we made every year with our students.
My name is Victor Zonana. I am a graduate of the program, and I'm going to fast forward 20 years from the beginnings of the tax program and take you to the point where I came into the tax program as a student. I was here in 1965-66, exactly 50 years ago. We had a very large class that year, remember, Carr? We had 160 students, and some of you may remember we had something like the war in Vietnam going on, and there were a great number of students who were here seeking student deferments. Many of them did. In any event, I came here. I took a number of courses. Many of them were with Carr. I took 2 courses with Carr, Tax Procedure 1 and Tax Procedure 2. I don't think I've done much with tax procedure over the last several years, and I certainly remember very little about several sections of the code where we spent 4 weeks studying them. 4 weeks, Carr. Sections 1311 to 1314, having to do with the mitigation of the statute of limitations. It was a thing of beauty. We peeled the onion, we really looked at it and spent countless hours doing it. In any event, that was my first year, my year in the graduate tax program. I had a couple of people that I remember. Carr was one, Jim Eustace was another one. There was a young faculty. They were all in their 30s at the time. All of you were in your 30s, and it was wonderful to begin to interact with you. There was also an instructor. We had a writing program, an instructor program with writing, research and taxation, and that professor that I had, that instructor that I had, was none other than Steve Gardner. Steve Gardner had graduated from the tax program some 6 months earlier, had come back from Florida, and was supervising a paper that I wrote, which had to be a little extra long and a little extra detailed because I had only had 18 credits of tax courses, and I desperately wanted an LLM in taxation. So I negotiated with Jerry, who was very close to his students, and he agreed that if I wrote a decent paper that was a little longer than usual, I might get those extra 2 credits. I did. Steve agreed that it was good enough, and Jerry reviewed it, and there I was. I had my LLM in taxation. Carr mentioned how these, the faculty, Jerry and Charlie, were really the placement office, the no career services back then. And it was a phone call from Jerry to somebody at Kay Scholler, Norman Sinrich, and I wound up getting hired. I was an associate at Kay Scholler for 3 years. I was doing fine. I was doing a lot of tax work, international, domestic, and so forth, until around 8 months into the practice, the 5th-year associate decided to leave. He decided to go to the Treasury Department. His name was Danny Halprin, and Danny left, and lo and behold, I inherited a pension plan practice. Deferred compensation became my thing. I did it for 2 or 3 years. It wasn't bad concentrating. Carr had told me you can concentrate in something, it's okay, you can move on to something else. And I did it for 2 or 3 years, but I was getting a little tired of it. So I would drift back to the law school every once in a while, and I would talk to Jerry and Charlie about what life was like. And they asked me at one point, somewhere around the spring of 1968, or spring of 69, whatever, spring of 68, fall of 68, what is it that you're practicing mostly in? And I said, well, I'm doing a lot of deferred comp. And he said, they thought about it for a minute, and they said, well, how would you like to come back and teach a section of deferred comp? We had a large number of students who were taking deferred comp back then. And very sillily, I said, yes, I will be happy to do that. Little did I realize that once I started, it would take 20 to 30 hours per week to prepare for 2 hours, trying to practice full-time at the same time. But nonetheless, I did it. And by then, halfway through the semester, I was beginning to get interested in the instructor position that Steve had had. And so I spoke to Jerry and Charlie again, and probably Carr at the same time. And they said, well, they would consider it. And I'm going along and into the 8th week of the semester, or maybe the 9th week of the semester, and start a class, and the back door opens, and in walks Jerry, and in walks Robert McKay, then dean of the law school. And they were auditing me. They were sitting there. They sat there for the first hour, and only the first hour, mercifully. I don't think the cotton in my mouth left me at any point. I was completely flabbergasted that they were there, but they stayed. And then nothing happened after that. The following week, I went to see Jerry, and I said, so? He said, I have only one bit of advice for you. He said, don't wear shoes that have leather soles and leather heels. And I sort of looked totally befuddled, didn't know what he was talking about. But it turns out that I paced back and forth. And back then, we didn't have carpeting on the classroom, on the podiums. We had wooden floors. And apparently, that staccato of my pacemaking interrupted what were lucid explanations of the integration of pension plans and Social Security benefits. There is somebody in the room here who remembers that, and I want you can talk to him afterwards, Bob Solomon, and ask him whether the explanations were lucid or not. And if he says they were not, I just want to remind him that the statute of limitations on grades has not expired. It never expires. In any event, leather soles and shoes notwithstanding, within a couple of weeks, I had an offer to join the faculty as an instructor, and I was delighted to do it. I did it. What was interesting about it is that I didn't have to go through any committees, didn't have to make any presentations. It was just slam bang, and I was hired. That was the end of it, as an instructor for a 2-year period. The other interesting thing that instructors may find here, current instructors may find amusing, or maybe sad, is that I was paid $17,500 a year, and I had a $2,500 summer school teaching stipend. So that made it $20,000 a year. And at that time, as I was leaving the law firm, I was making $19,000. So imagine today being hired on just a say-so of Jerry Wallace, and imagine getting a salary that is the equivalent of what a third-year associate is making. So that couldn't happen today either. In any event, I joined the faculty. My first and second years teaching were exciting, fun. I shared an office with somebody by the name of Bill Hutton. I know some of you may remember Bill Hutton. Bill is now emeritus at Hastings. We had the office together. We talked about tax law. There was a great deal of collegiality among the tax faculty. We used to eat lunch very often together. Carr, Jerry, Jim, Guy Maxfield, and a whole bunch of others. There was a particular restaurant we would go to by the name of Marta's. And there was something particularly unique about Marta's, and that is that there was a copy of the Internal Revenue Code that was kept behind the bar. Because there used to be disagreements, typically between Jerry and Charlie, who wouldn't listen to Jim, who knew everything. But we would then take out the code from behind the bar and go through the sections and figure it all out. That was my first year. I enjoyed the teaching. Everything was just kind of fun. The one thing that happened at the end of the year is that the year ended in turmoil. I don't know how many of you remember 1969-70, but in May, Cambodia occurred. The US invaded Cambodia. We wound up with a lot of civil disturbances, and there was this horrible tragedy that occurred at Kent State. The faculty at NYU was very sensitive to these issues, as were the students, and the law faculty decided, by close vote, decided to cancel exams in the spring as a sign of our support for what was going on, or demonstrating against what was going on. There was one person who was a 2L, Laurie Malman, who was delighted to hear that exams were being canceled. So we canceled the exams. And lo and behold, the New York Court of Appeals decided that just isn't going to work. They told us that unless we administered exams, they were not going to allow our students to sit for the bar. So that was a mess. So we wrote a brief, we filed, And on we went, and we had to give exams. We sort of gave exams afterwards. So that was the first year. The second year, I had another office mate. Bill had become a full-time faculty member by then on academic track, on a tenure track. And my next office mate was Carlin McCaffrey. Carlin was a student, had been a student in the tax program, although she hadn't finished her degree yet. She had been an instructor. She was an instructor then in what was the predecessor of the lawyering program. But she had met a lot of people in the tax program, and everybody was impressed, so Carlin joined us. We talked a lot about Tax One and income tax, but one of the things that I enjoyed mostly afterwards with Carlin, and that's only in retrospect, is that she basically educated me and heightened my sensitivity to the tax policy issues related to women, to children, and to families. And the one person who was most happy about that was my spouse, Marilinda, who finally decided I was coming of age, basically. In any event, I want to talk a little bit about the students that went through the tax program with me, at least during the decade of the 70s. And we wound up, I just did a quick count, we've wound up with 4 tax court judges, Judge Laro, Judge Wary, Jim Halpern, and Juan Vasquez, all from the classes of 1970s. They're all on the tax court. They're still on the tax court. And they were all students of mine, which I find that kind of pleasant. We also had a large number of practitioners who have become relatively famous or have been prominent in their field. Hap Shashi, who served as chief counsel of the IRS. Barney Phillips, who was a partner at Skadden. Kenny Heitner, who is here someplace, I think. Hey, Kenny, who co-heads the Weil-Gotshal Tax Department. Michael Scher, who was class of 79. Jim Peasley. And so that's among the practitioners who are students of ours. We also have some people who went into the corporate world. Fred Drasner went to work for Mort Zuckerman, the real estate developer, and became publisher of the Daily News. I don't know how many of you remember that. Joe Parkinson is a very interesting story. Joe was a student of mine in class of 71 or 72. He was an editor of the Tax Law Review, and was a very calm, very nice guy. Spent a year here teaching, and then decided he would go back to Boise, Idaho. That's where he was from. And in Boise, Idaho, within a year, he and 3 other guys founded Micron Technology. He stayed on with Micron for, 10 years, 12 years, and is now retired doing something else. And then, of course, there is none other than John Samuels, who was at Treasury. I tried to recruit him for the law firm. That didn't work. But John went off, obviously, to GE and revolutionized what tax practice is like within corporate tax departments. And then there are those who couldn't get away, who either couldn't get away or never wanted to go away. And those are the class of 1975 twins, Noel Cunningham and Brooks Billman, who stayed on to the faculty full time. Deborah, class of 76, who stayed on the faculty, joined the faculty at some later point. John Steinis, class of 78, who is here with us also. So that's the sum and substance of all of those people. Now, I stayed for 20 years, here for 10 years, 11 years, and then I went off and I did all sorts of other silly things. I practiced with law firms, I practiced with accounting firms, and then I was very fortunate to be able to come back 7 years ago, thanks to Deborah and Noel, who were kind enough to allow me to come back and teach on a full-time basis, albeit as an adjunct. I'm not a tenure track, I'm just an adjunct member of the faculty. It means, which is a blessing. I don't go to faculty meetings, I don't serve on committees. It's all very, very good. It's all very, very good. In any event, so just 2 minutes more, Josh. I want to talk a little bit about how the tax program has changed in the last 20 years versus in the last 50 years where it is today, from the years when I was here and what it's like today. We have, as has been mentioned, a great number of courses that are offered in many, 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 many disciplines. Second thing is that the focus and direction of the tax program has changed somewhat. We are much more policy-oriented than we used to be. We have tax policy courses. I mean, I taught a tax policy course with David Bradford for 3 years when I came back from Treasury. And David came back some 10 or 11 years later to pick it up with Dan and his colloquium. So we have a great deal of policy orientation now. The scholarship that is produced by the tax faculty also has changed. We no longer have the kind of article that Carr produced on 691, Income in Respect of a Decedent, or that Lenny produced on Charitable Remainder Trust that took up entire issues of the Tax Law Review. Can you imagine an entire issue of the Tax Law Review devoted to Charitable Remainder Trust? They don't see that today. Now we talk about capital, taxation of capital, we talk about income inequality and things of that nature. The other thing that has changed is the instructor program. It used to be that you came in, you did something for 2 years, and off you went, or you stayed on the faculty, as many of us were able to do. Nowadays, the instructors who have the moniker are called acting assistant professors with the moniker of APE, which absolutely makes no sense to me. They stay here for 2 years. They don't get back on the faculty here. They don't stay on the faculty beyond that. But they get ready, they're made ready to go on to other law schools. And many of them have been able to do that, producing wonderful scholarship articles, and under the direction of Deborah Skank and Josh Blank, who act as the placement people, basically, for these two fellows, or women, whoever they are. And finally, the graduate tax program has kept up with modern times. It has moved on, it has moved forward. We have an international tax program. For 20 years, we've had one that David directs now. We have the online courses that Josh has mentioned. We have and I teach in those video classes as well. And then most importantly, from the student's perspective and Josh's direction, basically, the tax program remains committed to excellence in teaching. That's the hallmark, that's been the hallmark of this program. It continues to be that. We continue to be the highest ranked graduate tax program in the country and probably in the world. So 70 years in, I'm very happy to say that the state of the tax program is very good. I'm happy to be a part of it, and may it continue forever. So thank you very much. Delightful.
I'm John Samuels, and I have to say it's a real pleasure to be here to follow my great friend and mentor and teacher, Carr Ferguson, my great professor, Victor Zonana, to be followed by my estate planner, Carlin McCaffrey, the best estate planner in, I think, the whole world. Like most of you, I've spent my life laboring in the world of tax, which a friend of mine told me made me about as sharp as a needle and about as wide. So I hope that's not true of you. I started in law school at the University of Chicago. I didn't go to NYU. I came to a big law firm in New York, Dewey Ballantine, that doesn't exist any longer, to do tax. I said I liked tax law in law school, and I liked corporate law. They said tax law. They put me into the tax group. It was love at first sight. I stayed there. I became a partner. I left to go to the government. Jimmy Carter was elected president. He was going to reform the tax code and do away with the 3-martini lunch. We were not very successful, but neither has any successive president been successful. I left the Treasury. I came back to my old law firm in New York, then went to, like all good lawyers, hustling clients all the time. I got a call that GE was looking for an in-house tax lawyer. Nobody ever went in-house in those days. But I thought, opportunity to go hustle a client. I was successful beyond my wildest imagination. I remember still my interview with Jack Welch, who got through all of the interviews, and finally I thought he was going to try to sell me, and I walked into his big corner office, and he looked at me and said, "Why do I need a tax lawyer?" He said, "What are you doing here?" And I thought, well, maybe you don't. I said, but just imagine that GE had a partnership with Mitsubishi, and that the partnership agreement were 75,000 pages long and very complicated. And the partnership agreement said Mitsubishi got 40% of the operating profit of GE. And I said that Jack, the chairman of Mitsubishi said, "Jack, you divide up the profits, you put your people on it, and we may check you 4 or 5 years later." I said, "You'd put some very good people on that partnership agreement." He said, "You're damn right I would." I said, "Well, that's the relationship you have with governments all around the world. And with taxes, and so you ought to put some good people interpreting the code. He, at which point, said, "When can you start?" So I did start. I spent 25 years there. It was a great 25 years. I'm retired at the end of last year. I'm still consulting for GE. I taught at Yale Law School for the last 10 years. I'm still teaching at Yale, running a couple of groups in Washington, and I'm going to start a new chapter in my tax life, which you can probably read about next week. I can't talk about it tonight. So I like you, live in the tax world. But I would not be here without this program. I'm pretty confident of that. I know, and I think there were at least two inflection points in my career that the program helped me on. First, after I had been, I said I took a couple of courses at the University of Chicago Law School. They like Yale, don't teach you what the law is. They teach you what it should be, although I had a great professor there, Wally Blum. And I came to New York, this big law firm in the tax group, and I thought I knew the tax law until I went to the first tax lunch. The tax department met, and these partners would bring all the associates in, and I felt like I was not in a foreign country, but in another planet. They were speaking language, code sections, this, that, and then they would go around the table and ask each of the young associates what they were working on, what they thought about it, and I tell you, the sweat started to pour down my forehead, and it did indeed for the first 6 months I was there, because these damn tax lunches occurred once a month, every month. And I realized I better learn the tax law. And so I went to, somebody told me about the program at NYU. I enrolled at night. I started right away with Tax 3. Was then the corporate course. And then the giants were walking the halls. As Carr said, Jerry Wallace, Charlie Lyon, the great Jim Eustice, the great Carr Ferguson, Harvey Dale, the young guns, Bill Hutton, Victor Zonana, Noel Cunningham, the spectacular adjunct, Steve Gardner, who taught me partnerships and has also taught me how to be self-confident. He's a terrific lawyer, how to be a great lawyer. It was really magical. And I learned not just the tax law, I learned a lot about judgment. Jerry Wallace, I could spend a lot of time telling great Jerry Wallace stories, but Carr did that. But great people. And I learned the law. And the difference, what tax law is different than other disciplines. You really do need to learn the law. There's a body of law you need to learn. It's a good thing. Economists call it high barriers to entry, but once you have learned the law, you have something that people can't take away from you. And so it really helped me keep going to the tax lunches. Soon I began even to look forward to them, believe that or not. The second place in my career where the program was really influential was after I'd been an associate about 3 or 4 years, and I'd been in the tax program. I was working with the chairman of the tax department, a guy named Charlie McLean, who was the head of the tax section of the ABA, and a gruff, tough guy. And his biggest client was Mobil Oil, big client, and the oil companies were very sophisticated in doing their tax planning. And the reason I know that is David Rosenblum and I shared offices across from each other at the Treasury. Literally, he was the International Tax Counsel and I was the Domestic Tax Counsel. Whenever the oil companies came in, I would hear David start to scream and shout, and they would be screaming and shouting. And I always put my money on David. In any event, I was at home in my apartment in the Village one Saturday morning, and the phone rings, and there weren't cell phones then, no caller ID. I pick up the phone, and it's a guy named Tom Bagg, who was the head of Mobil's tax department. And he said, this was 9:30 on a Saturday morning. He said, John, you have a few minutes to talk? I say, yes. No iPads then, no computers. He said, I've got a few tax questions for you. And I said, well, what's that? And Mobil was doing a very large acquisition. And he started to grill me on triangular mergers, section A2Es, A2Ds, reverse Bs, and thank God I had just taken reorganizations with Carr Ferguson. And I actually knew this stuff. And I was able to answer his questions quickly, responsively. The call lasted, I think, for maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, seemed like forever. The next week, Tom Bagg called Charlie McLean and said, you know that young man Samuels? He is a great tax lawyer. You ought to make him a partner. And I can promise you, without that phone call, that probably never would have happened. So I mentioned I teach law at Yale, which I do, and I've done it for 10 years, and I love the students, just like any good faculty member loves his or her students. And what I tell them is, first, they want to know what the law should be. I tell them you can't know what the law should be until you know what it is and why it is that way. And this program teaches you what the law is and why it is that way. And only then can you begin to think about how it should be changed. But then they ask me what to do for a career, those who want to do tax work. And I tell them, I would advise you to try to get a job with a big New York City law firm if you can, or a small New York City law firm, one that's got a good tax group. And then whatever they tell you, take the program, the LLM program at NYU. You'll learn the law because there's a lot to learn, and there's no better place to learn it than the NYU law program. So whatever success I've had in my career, I am confident in no small part is attributable to this program and the great professors and great friendships and all of the things I've learned. So I only hope that you, I'd like to be here. I plan on being here for the 100th Carr, and I know you will be too. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my estate planner, Carlyn McCaffrey.
Well, thank you, Josh, for asking me to come tonight to share my memories about New York University Law School and its tax program, its 70-year-old tax program. It's been an important part of my life as a student, faculty member, and adjunct for more than 50 of the 70 years that this program has been around. Now, I never wanted to be a tax lawyer. I actually wanted to be a flight attendant, but I never grew tall enough, so that option was out. So I went to law school. I went to NYU at night with visions of Perry Mason in my future. And I went at night because in 1963, NYU gave working men and working women the opportunity to go to law school on a part-time basis. In those days, NYU was a very different place. There weren't many women students at all. There were so few of us that we were able to form our own study group and that met every night before class in the women's staff lounge up on the second floor of Vanderbilt Hall. There were no women professors at all. All the best scholarship programs were restricted to men. There were no women Ruth Tilden scholars. They weren't permitted to apply. There was no casual Friday. There was actually a dress code, one that prevented the few women students we had from wearing slacks, even on snow days. And in the early 60s, all of this shockingly seemed perfectly natural to me. I was just grateful to be here. On the plus side for NYU, unlike I think other schools, I never noticed that any of our professors were reluctant to require our participation in class, and they did that. There wasn't much choice as to curriculum. Fortunately for me, although I didn't think so at the time, the federal tax law was a required second-year course, and I dreaded the thought of it. The tax code in 1964 was an intimidating thing. The top rate was 77%, just recently down from 91% the year before, and I was never very good at math. Guy Maxfield was my first tax teacher, and he was terrific. A little scary, but terrific. The course was what we eventually came to call baby tax: how you identify gross income, what are deductions, what are your exemptions, how do you calculate the tax. To my surprise, I discovered that I loved it. I was hooked. I was learning something that affected real people. Not everyone commits a tort, not everyone commits a crime or forms a corporation, but almost everyone has to deal with the tax law. And any lawyer working in any field at all has to keep the tax law in mind. It affects what the litigation winner gets to keep, and how corporate and other commercial transactions are structured. Now, unlike all those other courses where you have to worry about 50 different jurisdictions, 50 different sets of case law, statutes, dealing with corpus juris secundum in the West Digest system, in tax, there was essentially one law, and it was all in what was then a relatively slim volume. Sure, there were regulations, but then the regulations were only in 2 volumes. Best of all, there was Commerce Clearinghouse, Federal Tax Reporter, and the Prentice Hall equivalent. All the answers I needed, I could find in one of those places. It's difficult for you youngsters to appreciate that in 2016 when you can find all the answers you want just by Googling it. But it was more difficult then. In 1964, that was remarkable. After graduation in '67, I went off to clerk for a year. But I hadn't lost my enthusiasm for the tax law, and I returned the next year to begin studying for my master's in tax with some really terrific teachers, some of whom are here tonight. Charlie Lyon, Jerry Wallace, Carr Ferguson, Jim Eustace, George Zeitlin, and many others. And here, I brought a learning aid for you all. That was us back in the early 70s. In the 1 year I was away, when I was clerking, things at NYU had changed radically. There were, all of a sudden, more women students, many more women students. In fact, in that year, there were more women students at NYU Law than any other law school in the entire country, and they began to organize. They formed the Women's Rights Committee and worked to change things, and their first success was opening the Ruth Tilden Scholarship to women in 1969. With help from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was then a Rutgers University Law School professor, and the wife, by the way, of an NYU tax professor, Marty Ginsburg, we organized the first national conference of law women. Our organization meetings took place in Ruth's apartment and up in the faculty law library. And our first national meeting took place in 1970 in classrooms throughout Vanderbilt Hall. By that time, thanks to an invitation from Carr Ferguson, I had decided to join the tax faculty. My interest in the tax law hadn't faded, but my friends on the Women's Rights Committee had wondered what I was doing. How could the study of tax law be relevant to the societal changes that they were trying to engineer? But of course it is. Tax law is relevant to practically everything. The tax law was, and as a matter of fact still is, pretty much structured to encourage one parent in a 2-parent household to stay out of the workforce and remain at home caring for the children and doing the household tasks. And the one who stayed home back then, at least, was almost always the woman parent. Now, how does the tax law do that? It does it by not imputing income to the home worker and by not allowing a deduction for the cost of replacing those tax-free services. If a parent's services are worth $60,000 to $70,000 a year, no one pays any tax on that value. But if that parent goes out into the workforce and has to hire somebody to replace that $60,000 to $70,000 worth of services, there's basically no deductions for those services. We're so used to this principle that it may seem perfectly acceptable now, but think about it. We did, and we even picketed the tax court. Some of us with our children in strollers went down to the tax court while they were hearing a case for Michael and Elizabeth Namick, who were trying to deduct child care expenses as business expenses so that the wife could go to work. Now, there's a sad ending to that story because, of course, as you know, it didn't work. They lost. Ultimately, the case was lost, but it made the tax law very relevant to our women's rights group. So NYU's tax program over the years gave me the opportunity, first as a student, then as a teacher, to get a really solid understanding of the tax principles that have gone on to serve me very well in my practice for many years, despite the fact that the code now fills 2 big volumes and the regulations take up 6 volumes. The code has almost 4 million words. But one of the great things about the tax law, always seemed to me, is that it's always changing. It's a constant challenge. Who knows what the next change is going to be? And depending on what happens in the election, you youngsters may be able to read it all on a single postcard.
Hi, everyone. My name's Noel Cunningham, and I just wanted to say a few words about teaching at NYU. The tax program has always had a great reputation for launching the careers of successful tax lawyers, but what is less well known is how effective the tax program has been in launching the careers of tax academics. Our graduates are on law school faculties throughout the country. And one of the reasons underlying this is what is now known as, and Victor referred to it before, as our Acting Assistant Professor Program, or as it's commonly referred to as the APE program. This program actually originated, I think Victor talked about it, in the 60s, where NYU started to hire aspiring academics to a 2-year program to teach tax. During this 2-year period, at least currently, the person who is now referred to as an APE would have the opportunity to interact with other members of the tax faculty, develop classroom skills, and hopefully complete a draft of a significant article to use as a job talk. I personally cannot express how much I love the APE program and the positive impact it's had on my life. In 1975, I was lucky enough to be asked to become an APE. I had always wanted to be a teacher, but quite honestly, I suffer from performance anxiety, and I didn't really know if I could handle a large classroom full of students. As an APE, I was given the time and support that I needed to find out if I could. As it turned out, I realized that I was much better suited for teaching the law than for practicing it, and my academic career was launched. 40 years later, I'm still at it. I've always felt I was blessed to have the opportunity to be an APE. It was the best job I ever had, and Victor mentioned 2 reasons earlier why. I got to teach, no committee assignments, and no faculty meetings. It was all together. And since joining the full-time faculty, I have had the good fortune to work with and to get to know a new APE every year. This has been a wonderful experience for me because I find the APEs as a group very talented and interesting people. And as some of you know, I love apes. As a matter of fact, I love them so much I married one. Now, although the APE program has always been of the highest quality, over the past 25 years, it has really reached new heights. Typically, when one of our apes enters the job market, she becomes the most sought-after tax candidate in the country and typically receives many interviews and several callbacks. The APES program is in no small measure due to the role of our next speaker, Deborah Schenk. When Deborah became editor-in-chief of the Tax Law Review in 1989, she also became mentor-in-chief for the APE program. Although many of us work with the APES developing their teaching skills, Deborah devotes an enormous amount of time and effort to helping the APES develop their scholarship and preparing them for the job market, and she does a wonderful job. I can speak from personal experience how valuable and generous Deborah can be. Over the years, Deborah and I worked closely on many different projects, including several law review articles. She's just amazing. For example, she has the ability to critically read and analyze a draft while skillfully editing it. I'm in awe. I really am. And she's so generous. Since we first met in 1982, she has always volunteered to critically read every article that I have ever written, and my final products have always been much improved as a result of her efforts. The APES clearly have been very fortunate to have Deborah as their mentor, as I have been to have her as my very good friend and colleague.
So it won't come as a surprise to you, I'm Deborah Schenk. I graduated in 1976 in the evening program while I had already started my teaching career. Josh allotted me 10 minutes to talk about scholarship at NYU and the impact of the graduate tax program, and that, of course, is a completely impossible task. I would need all evening, but I will do a quick overview. So in addition to being known for its innovative and excellent teaching, NYU tax faculty have always been known for their contributions to the scholarly community. And I'm just going to give you a few examples of the impact. Mainly, it's numbers and name dropping. NYU faculty have produced some of the leading tax case books used in law schools around the country. The late Paul McDaniel, Laurie Mauman, Dan Shaviro, and I have all authored books that are used in basic tax courses. My colleagues Brooks Billman has co-authored a procedure book. John Steinis has authored a book on international tax, and I authored a book on tax ethics. We have influenced many former students, many of them are acting assistants, who have become academics and have also written their own case books. In addition, NYU pioneered the use of producing its own teaching materials, including, as others mentioned, the innovative problem method, which are now used by many of our former students across the country. Other published classroom materials include a popular nutshell on partnerships, which Noel wrote with a former ape, that would be his wife, and a tax map. I could probably spend all of my remaining years tracking down all the law review articles written by the full-time members of the tax faculty. I actually attempted to do that and gave up. By my count, we've had around 40 full-time tax professors, not including the apes, and all have contributed significant scholarship. For decades, some of the leading tax scholars in the country have produced their work at NYU. Tax faculty who are currently writing regularly scholarly articles include Lily Batchelder, Josh Blank, Noel Cunningham, David Kamen, Mitchell Kane, and Dan Shaviro. Articles written by our late colleagues, such as Charlie Lyon and Jim Eustace, continue to be cited regularly and are also still assigned. Some of my colleagues have produced scholarly books. Some were written years ago and are still widely cited, such as the late Paul McDaniel's Pathways to Tax Reform. The reigning champ, however, is Dan Shaviro, who has managed to write 10 books already, all of which have had an impact on the tax policy debate. NYU scholars have also produced a number of important treatises that are widely used by practitioners. For example, Guy Maxfield's treatise on estate and gift taxation and John Peschel's treatise on the taxation of trusts and estates were very early examples of this kind of scholarship. Our adjuncts are also quite active in the scholarly area. A number of them have written treatises, such as the late Michael Salzman, Bob Fink, and Rick Pomp, and they also have written a lot of scholarly articles as well. I've saved the best for last, or the most important, I guess I should say. That, of course, would be Bitger and Eustace. Some of you have probably never read a scholarly tax article. Some of you have probably never picked up another treatise. But I am confident that every single person in this room either borrowed or bought and actually consulted a copy of B&E. It is truly the granddaddy of all treatises, and for many people, it is NYU. Another prominent example of our contribution to scholarship is the Tax Policy Colloquium. It was begun by Dan Shaviro when he arrived in 1996, and it was the first such colloquium like that. It is currently in its 21st year, and it has always been run by Dan. For a long time, his co-convener was our late colleague, David Bradford. But after David's untimely death, his co-conveners have included a number of well-known economists and lawyers. At this point, there have been almost 300 papers presented by leading tax academics, all of which Dan has commented on at length. NYU is often the first to adopt something, but we often have many followers. Over the years, there have been almost 20 other schools that have followed our format and adopted tax colloquium, where my colleagues are often the presenters. Another major contribution to scholarship associated with the graduate tax program is the Tax Law Review, which began publishing just about the same time as the graduate tax program began in 1945. We are now working on volume 69. I believe, but I'm not positive, it was the first faculty editor journal at a law school. By now, there are a number of such journals. The TLR has always been edited by a full-time member of the faculty. There have been 11 editors-in-chief of the Tax Law Review. The first, as Cara mentioned, was a philosopher, Edmund Kahn. But after that, all the editors-in-chief were all taught tax at NYU. Two of them served for only a year, William Waugh and Leo Schmolka. But the following all served for 2 or 3 or more years: Robert McDonough, Norman Redlich, John Taggart, Victor Zonana, Mike Rollison, Jim Eustace, Brooks Billman, John Steinis, and Larry Locken. Except for me. I'm in my 26th year of editing the Tax Law Review, and I was an executive editor 3 years before that. I am not particularly proud of this, but a side effect of being an editor for 26 years is I believe I'm the world's leading authority on the Blue Book rules of citation. The TLR has had 366 student editors. These are the winners of our Tax Law Review Scholarship, our best entering students, and they assist me with what I don't want to do. I have enjoyed immensely working with all of these students and have followed many of their careers. For the first several decades, almost all the articles were descriptive, and they were written by practitioners, in part because there weren't really any tax faculty in the country. Tax was a topic taken up in constitutional law. In the last several decades, most of the articles have been written by academics, and today, I'll say that the TLR is the leading legal journal of tax policy. In our 7 decades of publishing, we have published 980, yes, I counted them, articles, reports, commentaries, and essays, 23 forwards, 11 tributes, 2 banquet transcripts, 1 letter, 1 survey, 1 group book report, 3 addenda, 1 corrigendum, which is a correction, and I found something called the editor's secret, which turned out to be pedantry. We also published in past years notes, which were written by practitioners, dissents and concurrences, which were disagreements or agreements with previously published articles, and book reviews. On 8 occasions, the whole issue was a single article. Len holds one of those. And on 1 occasion, the issue had only notes. There was no article in it at all. The largest volume, which I edited, contained 2 symposia and was over 1,000 pages long. The first article published by a female author was not until volume 21. Of the 980 articles we've published, only 83 have been written by women. Like many law reviews, we have held symposia. Before 1991, there were only 3 of them. The first one was actually devoted to how to be a successful tax lawyer. Then there was the Tax Reform Act of 1969 and one on simplification. Beginning in 1991, the Tax Law Review began to hold regular symposia, which presented papers prepared by academics, accountants, practitioners, and economists. We've covered a wide range of topics, from our first, which was on partnership tax, including wealth transfers, corporate tax shelters, European Union taxation, designing a VAT, et cetera. And many of the people in this room have contributed to those volumes. In 2012, NYU began its collaboration with UCLA, and each year we now hold the NYU-UCLA Tax Policy Symposium. Our topics have, as somebody had already mentioned, included the Piketty Symposium, healthcare reform, and the income tax at 100. We like to think that each symposium issue has the most relevant and the thought-provoking papers on the topic. Again, we were the first law school to produce a journal devoted solely to tax, but a number of schools had now followed in our footsteps. Today, there are at least 7 student-edited tax reviews, but we remain the only faculty-edited tax review. I would like to think that 15 years from now, someone else will be standing here on the 75th anniversary of the tax program, talking about their reign as editor-in-chief, extolling the 84th year the TLR has been published, although perhaps at that point only in digital form, and noting that the 500th paper has been presented at the Tax Policy Colloquium, and describing the ever-lengthening list of NYU-authored law review articles that continue to make NYU the center of tax scholarship. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is David Rosenblum, and I am the director of the International Tax Program, which is an entirely separate program, although we had a brief panel before this program started this afternoon where some of our early graduates said that it really wasn't so different. It was really part of the overall one program, and the international program was just part of it. I come to you from a different route from many of the other speakers. I am not a graduate of NYU Law School. I do not have an LLM from NYU in tax or anything else. I don't have an LLM anywhere. I have, however, taught at 5 law schools. And NYU is the 5 law schools in the United States. And NYU is the 5th one that I have taught at. The longest one that I taught at previously was Harvard, where I was on and off for 13 years. Started teaching international taxation in 1984, and I've taught VAT or related subjects ever since. And one thing, I come not as sort of a family member, although I've now been here for 14 years, but I come with a really profound admiration for what NYU has done in the international space. And I'm not sure it's as well appreciated as people, as it might be. NYU got into this international tax program. First year was 1996, 1997. The esteemed Paul McDaniel, who's been referred to many times, was the leading light in starting the program. And we now have, from that program, over 500 alumni around the world, from, by my count, somewhere between 45 and 50 countries. There's a little ambiguity there because you get people like, I'm thinking of a woman named Van Harris, who was actually from outside Nairobi, Kenya, but had been at Goldman Sachs in London before she came to the program. So is she from the UK or is she from Kenya? I don't know. But we have alums and we have students from all over, and every year there's a bit of a surprise. Next year we're going to have our first 2 students from Georgia. We will also have only our second student from Ecuador. NYU has really walked the walk in the international area, and I say that as someone who's really quite familiar with what other law schools have done, including Harvard, including Stanford. I'm less familiar with Penn and Columbia, although I taught there. But most of these schools have for quite a few years talked about how they want to become active in the international area. NYU really put its money where its mouth was and started this program. And the program has been incredibly vibrant. Every year we we've just sent out letters of admission recently, we admit to our international tax program somewhere between 14 and 28 or 30 students. We would take more, but that seems to be year after year the range that we attract. The qualification for being in this program is that you must be a lawyer and you must have your first law degree abroad. You can be, and some very few people are, U.S. citizens. I can think of 2 over the 14 years that I've been here. Generally speaking, they are not U.S. citizens. In the early days, the idea, at least Paul McDaniel's idea, was that the students would go back to their home countries. That proved to be not entirely realistic. And as the years went on, numbers, not all, but substantial numbers wanted to stay in the United States and found either temporary employment or permanent employment in the United States. It's a small program by comparison with the graduate program. Many of our students have not been in the United States at all before coming to New York. Some have been here only for a very brief time as tourists. It is a bewildering experience for some of them. There are others who are much more familiar with New York and with the United States, but in general, It's a different population than one thinks of when one thinks of the graduate program. On the other hand, it's also true that the graduate program is now, for quite a few years, admitted a substantial number of foreign students. So it is probably somewhat confusing from the standpoint of, I don't know, Beijing or Santiago or somewhere, to look at the NYU course offerings and the program offerings and to decide just what is the difference between this graduate program and this international program. Well, the big difference is we're smaller. And because all of our students are foreign, it tends to be a bonding experience in a way that is much harder to achieve when you're talking about 120 or 130 students. We try to give the students who are here for a very brief time, and 8 months goes by like a shot, we try to give them the year that is going to be the best year of their lives in every way we can. We do require more than the graduate programs, certain courses be taken. There are, out of 24 credits to graduate, there are 16 required credits in the international program. The graduate program is a lot more flexible, I think. It is a very high quality experience in terms of education. And I meet with all of the students at the beginning of every year, one by one. And I tell them essentially, and there are some in the audience, they all know this, I tell them three things. I tell them, first of all, that they're probably going to learn more from their fellow students than they learn from their professors, because the quality of the students that we attract from other countries is just amazing, and it gets better every year. And there's an awful lot to learn when you're spending a lot of time closely together with people that you would not otherwise have a chance to meet at all. Secondly, I tell them to take the program very seriously, because it is serious and people want to see performance, they want to see excellence. But the third thing I tell them, and this is very meaningful for the students from abroad, is to make sure that they don't leave here without experiencing New York City, because that's one of the attractions in our program that is really so important. We offer, in addition to the educational opportunities in the courses, we have a seminar program that is extremely active. This year we will have 17 seminars on Friday afternoons. The public is invited. We sometimes get members of the press. We get all sorts of people. Anybody can come, and we actually serve sandwiches. I'll tell you about that program, which I started when I took over for Paul after the 6th year. That's become sort of a practical supplement to the coursework. The idea of those seminars is to bring in practitioners, people, not only practitioners, government people, academics from around the world. Anybody who I can find and entice to come talk to the students for an hour and a half, we have these seminars. For example, just to give an example, an immediate example, we will have one of these seminars tomorrow afternoon, and it's going to be on the development of controlled foreign corporations in Brazil by a practitioner from a large law firm in Sao Paulo. That's a pretty typical thing that we'll do. After that, the next one is going to be by a practitioner from Chavez Ruiz in Mexico City. I'm sure he's going to talk about tax developments in Mexico. That's the kind of thing that we do in our seminars. We also have plenty of U.S. presenters. One thing I wanted to report on and just mention is that we have organized also what we call a practice council, which is an advisory board, and the origins of it are really go back to our opening lecture in the year, the Tillinghast Lecture. We have Tillinghast Lecture as our intellectual kickoff for the International Tax Program. It takes place usually in September or October of each year. This year we had Pascal Saint-Amand, who is the head of the he's the head of the OECD tax office and was the leader of the base erosion and profit shifting project for the OECD, a very, very popular and very demanded much in demand speaker, and Pascal gave a great lecture, and we're going to be publishing that later on. Any event, I wanted to have this, put this Tillinghast lecture on a sound financial footing, and together with the late Leonard Turr from Baker McKenzie, we put together something that we call the Practice Council. The Practice Council is our advisory board. We didn't do a lot of organizing to put it together. We basically went through our combined Rolodexes, sent out letters, and said to everybody that we addressed that it's going to cost you $5,000 to be part of this group. We would like you to come in. We would like to have funding for it, but we also want you to play a role in development of the International Tax Program. We got 33 return mail acceptances. The Practice Council is now at 59 people from 23 countries. We meet once a year. We're about to meet in April. People fly in from Asia, from around the world. Not the entire membership, but we usually get about somewhere more than half every year. So I'm quite proud of that. And the Practice Council members get first dibs on taking these Friday seminars, and they usually take up many of them. So that's another feature of the program. Another thing that's happening and that I'm very pleased with is that we've long offered to our students the opportunity to do internships. For many years, we've had an internship in the summer with the International Monetary Fund in Washington. This year, we have now, I think, permanently, but certainly temporarily, arranged for 2 separate internships with the tax function at the United Nations. So our students, having come here to study with us for 8 or 9 months, can then spend a couple of months, if they prevail in getting these fellowships, working in that capacity. This is all fantastic from the standpoint of NYU's reputation, its reach. We have, I think it's fair to say, we have literally 400 or 500 very, very loyal NYU alumni around the world that we can call upon, and we do call upon, for all sorts of things, including recruiting of our students, coming to give conferences, organizing seminars, et cetera. So I'm happy to report that the International Tax Program, and this is its 20th anniversary, it's coincidental, the same as the 70th of the graduate program, is strong and vibrant. We have just sent out admission letters to 36 students from 21 countries, and we'll see how many of them we get next year. I would imagine somewhere in the 20s. Later in the year, probably after graduation, we are going to put out a volume. This will be the second volume that we've put out. This is in celebration of 20 years of the ITP. And in there, we will have texts of some of the Tillinghast lectures, Pascal Saint-Amant's lecture. We'll have articles by the foreign professors who come to teach in our program. We have a visiting foreign professor every year. This year, it's Professor Luis Chuere from Sao Paulo in Brazil. Next year, it'll be Richard Van from the University of Sydney in Australia. This is a truly international program. It is not just a veneer of international. This is truly international. We try to make it as broad as we possibly can. And I'm just very proud and pleased to be given the opportunity to be up here and to be directing it. So thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you to all of the speakers for your remarks. I think it's clear by now that the success of the tax programs at NYU is attributable not just to some abstract concept of reputation or prestige, but to the efforts of specific individuals. And so to conclude our program, we'd like to acknowledge 3 individuals and honor them for their lasting positive influences on the tax programs and the tax law profession. First, our first honoree is Carr Ferguson. As many of you know, Carr was a full-time member of the tax faculty from 1962 to 1977. Until 2013, he co-taught advanced corporate tax problems with his colleague Norman Sinrich. Unfortunately, when Norman passed away in 2013, Carr retired from teaching. Many of our graduates credit Carr with instilling in them a passion for corporate tax law issues and practice. As one of Carr's former students, who later became a leading practitioner, commented to me, quote, "When Carr was my teacher, he was methodical, thorough, and patient. He coaxed me into considering different perspectives and interpretations of the Internal Revenue Code and related authorities. He invited challenges and had not the slightest hesitation in admitting, on the few occasions that it happened, that the challenge was valid and that it taught him something new. He loved teaching, and it showed. In addition to teaching with us for so many years, Carr is a trustee of the NYU Law Center Foundation. Thanks to his generosity and his friends' and colleagues' generosity, we've established the M. Carr Ferguson Scholarship, which is awarded each year to a full-time tax LLM student who demonstrates academic excellence and an interest in legal academia or public service as a career. Thank you, Carr, for everything you've done for this place. And on behalf of the Graduate Tax Program, I'd like to present you with a certificate of appreciation from the law school and call you up to the podium to present.
Well, this is quite a surprise. I didn't expect anything at all from Josh. I feel more than amply rewarded just by having been part of the school so long, a school that I love very much. I feel very comfortable here, Josh, in front of these two flags, which, when I was Assistant Attorney General, I took and put behind my desk in Washington, both the United States flag. In fact, I think that was already there, but I did bring a full-sized NYU flag. I still have it at home, but I don't have a ceiling high enough to put it up. This is award means a great deal to me, and I don't know how innovative I was, but I know that I learned a lot from a lot of you. And I think the certificate really should be given to each of you. Thank you very much.
Next, we'd like to acknowledge the contributions of another of our colleagues who you've heard about tonight, Steve Gardner. Steve is currently teaching corporate tax 2 as an adjunct professor of law, and I mean literally currently teaching. He was teaching until 30 minutes ago when he dismissed his class early in order to be here tonight. So thank you for that, Steve. At the end of the last academic year, Steve celebrated his 50th consecutive year of teaching on our faculty. Steve has taught a number of courses in the graduate tax program involving taxation of corporations and shareholders. He's an engaged and enthusiastic member of the tax faculty. In navigating the intricacies of Subchapter C, Steve deploys detailed problem sets and relies heavily on the use of the Socratic method to push his students to approach the issues as they will in practice. One of Steve's former students commented, quote, "Professor Gardner is one of the best lawyers I have ever learned from. I felt like he really prepared me to become a better lawyer." In addition, I'll say, as one of Steve's former corporate tax 2 students, I will add that he is deeply passionate about Subchapter C. I have never heard anyone speak about ambiguous statutory provisions or outdated regulations in such colorful terms. His passion for the material not only entertains his students, but it truly inspires them to learn. So thank you, Steve, for your ceaseless support of the Graduate Tax Program and its students. And I'd like to invite you up to present also on behalf of the law school and the tax program a certificate of appreciation. So last, on this special occasion, we would like to present the James S. Eustace Tax Leadership Award. Every few years, the law school presents an award to an alum who has distinguished him or herself as a leader in the legal profession and who has had a significant impact on this graduate tax program. The award's named for our legendary colleague and teacher, Jim Eustace, a giant in the tax world and a member of our faculty for over 50 years. Past recipients are Jim Eustace himself, the first recipient, Carr Ferguson, Lou Steinberg, John Samuels, and Len Schmolka. Tonight, on behalf of the tax faculty and the law school, it's my pleasure to present the 2016 James S. Eustace Tax Leadership Award to our colleague, Deborah Skank. Now, if she'll allow me, I'd like to take just a few moments to describe Deborah's accomplishments. Many of my comments that I'll read are direct quotes from Deborah's colleagues and her current and former students who contributed thoughts and anecdotes in advance of this evening's festivities. So to begin with a review of Deborah's accomplishments, as a scholar, Deborah has had and continues to have deep impact on tax law scholarship and academic debate. She's the author or co-author of 3 books, including Federal Income Taxation Principles and Policies with Michael Gratz, one of the most widely used tax textbooks in the US. She's authored numerous influential academic articles on topics such as the capital gains preference, the realization rule, tax simplification, tax ethics, and more recently, behavioral economics and the design of taxes. As a teacher, Deborah is dynamic, engaging, and all around incredible. As one of my colleagues has said of Deborah's teaching, quote, "For her students, Deborah has been an always available, always welcoming, encyclopedically knowledgeable educational resource." To give you a sense of the effect Deborah has had on her students, one former student commented to me, quote, "Professor Skank's classroom is where I realized for the first time who I really was, for better or worse, a tax person." And I'll also add my own anecdote if I can. About 10 years ago, when I was a very junior professor, Deborah asked me to be the substitute teacher in one of her basic income tax classes, and it was right in the middle of the semester. So I dutifully prepared all of my lecture notes. It was like 20 pages of notes, and I walked into this classroom, and these students had been in the class already with Deborah for about 8 weeks. And I asked what I thought would be a quick question to get things started, which is why Congress created the special 2% floor under Section 67 of the Code. Instantaneously, in a class of about 100 students, 80 hands simultaneously shot up in the air. I think I made it through about 3 pages of those 20 pages of notes. This level of class participation was completely normal in Deborah's classroom, where students were used to actively engaging with the material and their teacher in every class on every issue. Deborah has served as the editor-in-chief of the Tax Law Review since 1989. She continues to serve in this position. As one colleague characterized Deborah's role on the Tax Law Review, quote, "In direct consultation with authors, Deborah has contributed to and edited hundreds of articles across the entire tax spectrum. She has a family, cumulatively numbering in the hundreds of graduate tax student editors. Because Deborah personally reviews and edits every article and every footnote in every article that's published in the Tax Law Review, this peer-edited journal has become one of the top choice publishing venues of the Academy's leading tax scholars. And Deborah has made countless contributions as a mentor, citizen, and colleague. At the law school, in addition to leading the Tax Law Review, she has served as faculty director of the graduate tax program. Outside the law school, she has participated in the executive committees and the advisory boards of the ABA tax section, New York State Bar Association tax section, and tax analysts. She's provided tax advice on a pro bono basis to low-income taxpayers. One of Deborah's major contributions, as Noel mentioned, is that she serves as one of the primary mentors to the acting assistant professors of tax law. In this role, she's advised aspiring academics on their first teaching experiences, their job market papers, their research agendas, and more. By my count, she has personally mentored at least 40 acting assistant professors of tax law. And Deborah's mentorship of tax scholars is not limited to just those at this law school. As one of my colleagues wrote to me, quote, "I would not be surprised if half the tax law academics in this country were directly mentored by Deborah." As a former acting assistant professor of tax law who was mentored by Deborah, I can safely say that I owe my own career as a tax academic and my own position at this law school to Deborah. So in reviewing all of the comments from Deborah's colleagues and students, 3 basic attributes continue to appear. First, Deborah is dedicated. She spends thousands of hours editing the Tax Law Review, including during the summer and on the weekends. And I'll tell you, indeed, 30 minutes before this event, I saw her tonight editing an article. And it's with her, I see, under her chair. She displays what can only be described as devotion to the aspiring academics she's mentored. From working with Deborah and the Acting Assistant Professors Program, I can tell you that it's absolutely par for the course for Deborah to monitor their progress wherever she is, whether it's in the office, at home, on vacation in Africa, or Hawaii. Second, Deborah is intellectually honest. As one colleague who views Deborah as a mentor has written to me, quote, "She never shies away from speaking tough truths and can be brutally honest in a way that someone only does if they deeply care about making you and your work better," quote. Another commented that at our weekly tax policy colloquium, Deborah, quote, "lobs incisive questions and suggestions at the speakers, all while she is knitting." From personal experience, I'll say that whenever I write a paper, if I ask Deborah to read it, I always build in at least 3 days to review and then to recover from Deborah's comments, which always highlight every claim and statement that I should reconsider. And I'm not surprised if Deborah's honesty goes beyond intellectual honesty. One of Deborah's former students wrote to me, quote, "In class, when impressing upon us the broad scope of Section 61, all income from whatever source derived, she told us that as a tax professor, if she finds a dime on the street, she reports it on her tax return." Last, I will say, Deborah is selfless. While many scholars make their own scholarship and teaching their first priority, Deborah is constantly finding ways to help other scholars and her students. There's little personal recognition that comes from editing literally tens of thousands of footnotes in other scholars' articles so that they can be published in a peer-edited journal, or from spending countless hours mentoring aspiring tax academics or advising her colleagues regarding their own professional questions and concerns. In terms of Deborah's selflessness, one of my colleagues wrote to me, quote, "Deborah hates the spotlight with a passion, but at some point we have to ignore her wishes and toot her horn for her," quote. Indeed, in just a few moments, I will consider one of my greatest professional accomplishments to be that I was able to convince Deborah to accept this award, named in honor of her colleague and her former office neighbor, Jim Eustice. So for all of these reasons, Deborah, you are the ideal recipient of the James S. Eustice Tax Leadership Award. And if you could come forward, I'd like to present the award to you on behalf of the law school. So I'll just read. The award says that the James S. Eustice Tax Leadership Award is presented to Deborah H. Skank in recognition of her extraordinary and inspirational contributions as a scholar, teacher, editor, and colleague.
I'll only keep you a minute longer. I am deeply honored by this. I thank my colleagues. I'm deeply honored to receive the James Eustice Award. This is all very embarrassing, so I'm going to tell a short story that's not very flattering. 10 years ago, at the 60th anniversary of the tax program, I was privileged to speak and actually award Jim Eustice the first Jim Eustice Award. And I'm going to repeat a story I said then. Not many people read the Tax Law Review cover to cover, but Jim did. He read every footnote. He read every word. And whenever there was a mistake or a wrong pin site or something missing, Jim came to my office and pointed it out to me. I have a collection of these mistakes. I only made one that I deeply regret. Maybe 20 years ago now, we dedicated an issue of the Tax Law Review to Jim. And on that issue, I gave Jim a new middle initial. Jim came to my office, and he pointed it out to me. He was very gracious. And then he went back to his office, and about 5 minutes later, he went through his file cabinet where he kept every piece of paper that ever came through the law school, and he produced a 1950s law school alumni magazine column in which Jim Eustice was given a different initial. And he said to me, "Don't worry, things happen." I assume by getting this award, I've been forgiven. Thank you.
So thank you, Deborah, and thank you all for coming this evening and for your support of the Graduate Tax Program and the International Tax Program. Please join us for a reception, and thank you all for coming. Have a good night. Thank you.